I must acknowledge that I made a significant error in judgment. As a result of my actions, I lost the man I loved. I deeply regret causing him pain, but I am even more distressed by his decision to leave rather than attempting to resolve our issues. I had hoped he would remain and assist me in learning from my mistakes, rather than abandoning me. I am profoundly disillusioned by my choices. I had the opportunity to enjoy the company of a kind, supportive partner and an exemplary husband. I squandered this opportunity for the sake of Amir. At the age of 19, I met my husband, who was 21, at a library. Prior to this, I had never been in a relationship or even been on a date. I was quite introverted, and my main focus at university was my education. I did not want any distractions. He approached me at the library one day and complimented me, saying that he had noticed me around and wanted to get to know me better. He asked for my phone number, but I turned him down immediately. I did not want to give out my number and was not looking to get involved with anyone at school. I just wanted to focus on my studies and get my degree. Over the next few months, he would often come over to the table where I was studying with my friends. Sometimes he came alone, and other times he would join in conversations with my friends. Gradually, I got used to seeing him every day. I observed him from afar as I studied and noticed how he interacted with others. I was not inclined to provide my number and was not seeking a romantic involvement with anyone at school. My primary objective was to focus on my studies and complete my degree within the next few months. He would frequently visit the table where I was studying with my friends. On some occasions, he came alone, while on others, he joined in conversations with my friends. I gradually became accustomed to seeing him daily, observing him from a distance as I studied and noting how he was able to interact with my friends on a regular basis. One day, however, he did not attend the library, which caused me concern. I inquired with my friends about his whereabouts, but they claimed to be unaware of his absence. One of them even suggested that perhaps he had lost interest in me and had moved on. These words caused me distress, and at the time, I was unable to fully comprehend the depth of my feelings for him. It was only later that I realized I was falling in love with him. The realization that he might have moved on caused me significant distress. He did not show up the following day, and I grew increasingly concerned. I inquired with my friends if any of them had his phone number so that I could ascertain his well-being, assuming he might be unwell or in the hospital. However, they all informed me that they did not possess his number because I had specifically requested that they not take it. In retrospect, this seemed peculiar. On the subsequent day, he returned to the library, as he consistently arrived at the library with his friends, said his goodbyes, and proceeded to the shelves. On this occasion, he selected a textbook bearing the code C3001 and joined us at our table. This was the first time I had closely observed the course material he was studying. I inquired about his absence over the past 2 days. In response, he adopted a teasing tone and said, "Oh, she speaks." This remark provoked a round of laughter from the table. I was being entirely serious. I had not seen him for 2 days, and I began to feel concerned. As I removed my glasses, which I had been wearing for an extended period, I looked at him directly in the eye. He gazed back at me, initially surprised, and then a smirk appeared on his lips. He was remarkably handsome, almost resembling a character from a cartoon. I was perplexed as to why it took me so long to notice that he had an average build but striking features. His good looks compensated for the lack of height, which was only 5 feet 9 inches. His blue eyes were captivating and seemed to possess an endless depth. Despite his modest height, he exuded a strong presence. His voice was deep and raspy, and I recall sometimes feeling the vibrations in my body when he spoke. It may sound silly, but it's moments like those that I miss the most. After a brief pause, he responded, "You worried about me," with a hint of amusement in his voice. I would believe it. "You, but I'm not even sure you know what my name is," he added with a playful tone. "Stanley," I replied immediately, prompting laughter from my friends at the table. "You see, you don't even know my name," he teased, joining in the laughter. "That's a nickname I got back in junior high, and it stuck with me all the way here," I explained. "Besides, it's not Stan Lee, it's Stanley like the owner of Marvel Comics," he clarified. I elected to sit alone, having never observed him in the library before, let alone in a solitary state. It seemed as though he had overheard me, and I experienced a sense of culpability for being unaware of his identity. I found myself peering at him with trepidation, biting my nail and secretly hoping he would return to our table or at least cast a glance in my direction. He spent the subsequent 3 hours absorbed in the books he had selected from the shelf, with examinations on the horizon. This was an understandable circumstance, yet I remained uneasy. I was acutely aware that I was the reason for his shift in attention. If you miss someone that much, you should initiate a conversation. My friend Sophia suggested that I speak with him. I was reluctant to do so, however, as I was engrossed in my own studies and preparing for an upcoming examination. I was already familiar with the subject matter in the book I was reading and had begun to prepare for the exam. I continued flipping through the pages, contemplating whether I should approach him. Eventually, I decided to do so. I ultimately yielded to the temptation of approaching him. I stood up and walked over to the table where he was sitting. I began by offering an apology, which he later described as the epitome of an adorable anime-style apology. He looked up at me, raising an eyebrow in that way he did when he wanted someone to repeat themselves. I proceeded to initiate a conversation with him, which proved to be somewhat challenging. He seemed to notice my presence and assured me that he wasn't upset or anything, even though he wasn't. He was pleased that I was unaware of his name. He proceeded to explain that he had relocated to a different table due to the necessity of focusing on studying for an imminent examination. He made a point of noting that the professor was particularly rigorous and did not award high grades easily. He then went on to emphasize the importance of passing the course and thus avoiding an additional year in college. He also made a light-hearted addition to this, stating that he would have remained at our table but that he found it more appealing to spend time looking. I mustered the courage to inquire about his name. He closed his book and smiled warmly. Daniel, he said, introducing me to Daniel, had always seemed like an ideal match for me. I still believe that to be true, but I was perplexed about why I had missed my earlier opportunity. As I stood to leave, he reached for my hand and I felt a surge of excitement. I experienced a sudden surge of excitement. Tomorrow, he proposed, I accompany him to an outing following his examination. I was gratified that he had extended the invitation. I was aware that had he requested my company at an earlier juncture, I would have readily accepted. However, at this juncture, I was overcome with a sense of trepidation, accompanied by a fluttering sensation in my abdomen. This young man, I reflected, truly captured my attention. In hindsight, I wished I had the opportunity to alter the course of events. I would have been more attentive to his words, exerting greater effort to foster a connection with him. I am seeking some sort of sympathy from strangers as I reminisce about the good times I shared with Daniel. Our date went well, and I thoroughly enjoyed his company. He had a great sense of humor and shared meaningful thoughts. He was charismatic, and I couldn't help but notice the jealous looks from other girls when they saw us together during our date. He mentioned that he had been the runner-up. I was compelled to consider the merits of Mr. Uckler, and I found myself unable to deny the appeal of his qualities. He was deserving of such a title, as there were few males more aesthetically pleasing than he. Our relationship during our tenure at Uckler was reminiscent of a high school romance novel. He was frequently invited to social gatherings, and when he did attend, we walked hand in hand and were inseparable. We even earned the designation of the most influential couple in his final semester at the university, primarily due to him. Prior to our relationship, few individuals were aware of my existence. He was my inaugural experience with numerous milestones, including my first date, first kiss, and initial romantic attachment. However, he had previously encountered these experiences, with the exception of marriage. He was always patient with me, taking the time to explain things I didn't understand and rarely getting angry. I made a foolish mistake, constantly comparing our sexual experiences and feeling dissatisfied that he was the only one on my list. I wanted to have more experiences to brag about. I thought it was a rational idea to sleep with other people, and several months after we got married, I began discussing the idea of opening up our marriage. I had previously mentioned it, but his strong rejection made me fear I'd lose him if I pursued it. One day, I asked him what he thought. His reaction would be to terminate the relationship. His straightforward response, "I'll leave without a second thought," infuriated me. I felt like he was unfairly restricting me, especially when he had his own adventures before we were together. I waited for a few more months and raised the topic again, but he gave the same unwavering answer. This convinced me to wait until after we got married, thinking he might see things from my perspective once we tied the knot. When we finally did get married, I decided to bring it up once more. I have to admit it was selfish of me to marry him. I believed that I could explore my sexuality without losing the man I loved. I assumed that now that I had him, I could do as I pleased. I deeply regret not listening to and understanding his feelings about it. I ignored his words, and now I despise myself for letting my one true love slip away. This is a common experience. Opportunities are fleeting, and in hindsight, I recognize that I squandered my chance at being loved for who I am. Years after losing Daniel, I have yet to find a partner who treats me as well as he did or loves me to the same extent. Our honeymoon, which lasted 4 months, would have been a 4-month holiday if I hadn't ruined it. If I had not initiated the rupture, we would have enjoyed a 1-month holiday. We had been together for 5 years, and my desire to be intimate with other men began 3 years into our relationship during our honeymoon. I had fantasies of being with someone else while my husband watched, which I deeply regret. There is often a temptation or motivator for committing terrible acts, and my motivation was a man named Tom. He was tall, standing at 6 feet 5 inches, and maintained a regular workout routine. He maintained a rigorous exercise regimen and possessed a formidable physique, frequently attired in attire that accentuated his extensive gym regimen. I am of a similar height, standing at 6 feet 1 inch, and thus encountering an individual who made me feel diminutive was a singular experience. He was a recent addition to my workplace and ultimately became my superior, necessitating daily reports. He was in his 30s, a considerably older age than my husband, or, perhaps more accurately, my former spouse. My husband exhibited a flirtatious demeanor and was always soft-spoken, as if he were attempting to seduce me. Reporting to him daily became a challenge because I had to maintain professionalism while simultaneously experiencing a profound attraction to him. Then, one day, he asked me to go for drinks with him. I was incredulous. Was he hitting on me, or was he merely being friendly? Did he have a genuine interest in me, or was he merely noticing my attraction and attempting to exploit it? These thoughts swirled in my head, and I was unsure of how to respond. I considered how my dear Daniel would feel, and I did not consider the possibility of hurting him. We went for drinks at a bar near the office, and I consumed more alcohol than I should have. Our conversation shifted from getting to know each other to a more private and intimate discussion that was not meant for public ears. I confessed my desires to him. I wanted to be more than just one man's woman. I told him about my wish to open up my marriage for sexual liberation without guilt. I even admitted to having a crush on him. He inquired as to whether I had discussed this with my husband. I replied in the affirmative, but he does not share my perspective. He also stated that he would leave me if I proceeded with this course of action. Tom then offered advice that, in retrospect, was misguided. At that time, I was seeking any solution that would relieve me of the responsibilities associated with my choices. He suggested that instead of asking my husband, I should tell him that we should open up the marriage for me to have my fun. In hindsight, I realized that Tom was a person who provided poor counsel. He proffered advice with unwavering confidence that it was the optimal course of action. In retrospect, I understand that he said those things because he wanted to be with me that night. He made me feel like the most important person in the world. I know it was the same treatment I received from my Daniel every day, but getting that from a different man for the first time ever made me feel like a teenager again. We parted ways that day after sharing a kiss. When I got home, my husband was sleeping in the living room, probably because he had been awaiting my return from work. I entered the residence quietly, proceeded to the bathroom to shower and brush my teeth, and attempted to eliminate the residual alcohol odor. I was still somewhat inebriated, but I was able to maintain control. I awakened him and informed him that I required his attention regarding a matter of importance. He mentioned that he, too, had something he wished to discuss, but I was given the opportunity to speak first. He displayed a pleasant expression as he listened attentively. However, his demeanor abruptly changed. I was not concerned, as I had convinced myself that I was doing the right thing. I informed him that I simply wished to convey that I am compelled to pursue this course of action. I would be grateful for his support. I am unable to cope with the realization that he possesses considerably more experience than I do. This makes me feel as though he is settled for me. I do not wish to be the woman he has settled for. I aspire to be desired and admired by other men, just as he was with other women prior to our meeting. I do not believe I can be happy unless I take this step. We are opening up the marriage, and this is not something that can be discussed further. These were the hurtful words. I informed the man who had previously expressed affection for me that I was being referred to by a derogatory nickname at college, which was derived from a weird nerd. I had used this term with a man who had ceased using it. The man who had given me attention I believed I deserved had caused me to experience distressing memories. I became emotional when I recalled the incident. I questioned my own foolishness. He gazed at me intently for a while, then lowered his head as if he had been defeated. He sat in silence for what felt like an hour. Prior to stating that he had expressed his views, he indicated that the matter was concluded. He then proceeded to the bedroom, leaving me uncertain about what he had intended to convey earlier. He dismissed the issue, attributing his fatigue to overthinking at the ceremony. The following day, I initiated physical intimacy with my superior. We had engaged in sexual intercourse in his office earlier that morning, marking the beginning of a new phase in my relationship. Tom was my inaugural intimate partner who was not Daniel. There were numerous subsequent partners. I frequently socialized with my colleagues. On Fridays, workers would often engage in sexual intercourse with a variety of partners at their regular designated locations. On occasion, I would awaken on a Saturday next to a stranger with whom I had never previously interacted and would never meet again. I was, at the very least, promiscuous. I believed that this behavior was merely a phase and that I would eventually cease engaging in it. However, I was unaware of the consequences that I would have to face as a result of my newfound enlightenment. I continued to engage with different men almost every day or every other day for a period of 2 months. Subsequently, as I was preparing for work, Tom arrived at my residence. He was scheduled to collect me, presuming that my husband had already departed for his place of employment as was customary. I considered the possibility of a brief encounter before our joint departure for the office. My husband opened the door to Tom, who was in possession of a floral arrangement. I was unable to discern their discourse over the din of the running shower as I was engaged in my ablutions. Upon their emergence, they were Daniel and I exchanged pleasantries. He even made a joke, stating, "So you're the guy who has sex with my wife while I'm busy changing light bulbs." Daniel was never one to display emotions, whether it was anger, pain, disappointment, or sorrow. It was difficult to discern his emotional state, he would either smile or frown. Therefore, I genuinely believed that he was comfortable with our open marriage arrangement. He even held the door open for me. As I entered Tom's vehicle, I was still young and naive, and thus unable to fully comprehend the gravity of my actions regarding my marriage. During the drive to the office, Tom made light-hearted remarks about my husband's apparent acceptance of the open marriage concept. He even suggested that my husband might be a cook and inquired if I would be interested in watching. That Friday was a Friday, but unlike every other Friday in the past 2 months, I did not go out with my coworkers. Instead of the anticipated encounter with a fellow worker, I found myself in the company of Tom, my superior. We had reserved a hotel with glass windows that provided a view of the city's nightlife. That night, we engaged in a satisfying and intimate encounter. The following Saturday, upon returning home and opening the door, I immediately sensed a difference in the atmosphere. It was unusually quiet. Typically, my husband and I did not work on Saturdays. He would spend the mornings playing his favorite songs loudly on the speakers. Even when I arrived home in the early hours after working late or having one of my affairs, he would still have his music playing loudly. I proceeded to the house gym, only to discover that he was not on the treadmill as he typically was on Saturdays. I then went to the kitchen, hoping to find that he had made coffee, as was his habit. I observed my favorite cup sitting on the kitchen counter, which elicited a positive emotional response, as it served as a reminder of the life we had shared since moving in together 3 years prior. Upon retrieving the cup, I intended to take a sip, but it was empty. Upon opening the cup, I discovered an envelope containing a letter. The exact contents of the letter escape me, but I have retained it as a memento of how I allowed something beautiful to fall apart due to my desire for more romantic encounters. I am profoundly disappointed in myself. I have made numerous foolish mistakes in my life, but allowing Daniel to slip away stands out as a particularly egregious error. This decision ranks as the most foolish I have ever made. I retrieved the letter from the envelope, leaving it in the cup that still carried his scent. After more than 5 years, the note read, "I hope you are well. You may be wondering why you cannot hear Smooth Criminal playing on the speakers. By the time you read this, I will likely have arrived in South Africa. My company is launching a 5-year program to nurture the brightest computer-literate minds in Africa, and I will be spending the next 5 years there. Do not worry. I have not forgotten about your infidelity. When I return, we will begin divorce proceedings. I hope Tom's company and the other men you have been with were worth it. Yesterday confirmed otherwise. I regret ever knowing you. I will be spending the next 5 years in South Africa, where I will participate in a year-long program to nurture the brightest computer-literate minds in Africa. I have not forgotten about your infidelity. When I return, we will begin divorce proceedings. I hope Tom's company and the other men you have been with were worth it, as you initially suggested. I thought you were joking, but yesterday's events confirmed otherwise. I regret ever knowing you. If I could alter one aspect of my life, it would have been my initial decision to end the relationship. I would have done so when you initially indicated that you were not interested in continuing the relationship. I recognize that my decision to end the relationship was influenced by the pain you have caused me over the years. I do not intend to conceal this fact. In addition to the note, there was a flight ticket dated for Saturday, June 7, 2014, and a passport bearing my name on the back of the flight ticket. Attached to the passport was a message. It should be noted that, 2 months prior, I had informed him of the news. This is the result of my company's sponsorship of our stay in South Africa, which includes an offer of employment to you. Upon discovering his wedding ring, I experienced a profound sense of loss. I spent the remainder of that day in a state of shock, unable to eat or drink. The following year was a period of prolonged distress. I experienced a period of depression as my life gradually disintegrated. This began with the day when Tom's closest friend, Elias, arrived to retrieve all of Tom's belongings. I was overcome with emotion as I observed him and the movers removing Tom's possessions, which had become deeply meaningful to me. The act of kindness allowed me to retain possession of a box of Tom's cologne and his preferred hooded sweatshirt. However, the following day, he returned to retrieve these items. He discovered me still attired in the same outfit I had worn to work on Friday. Exhausted from a period of continuous crying that had lasted over 24 hours, I was unable to offer any resistance as Elias removed the aforementioned items from my possession. Elias then proceeded to remove the hoodie from my possession. He regarded me with disdain and informed me that Stanley had informed him of my actions. He stated that I had brought disgrace upon women everywhere and expressed his hope that I would carry this regret for the remainder of my life. He then took the cologne and departed, remarking that if it were not for the laws, if I were not constrained by the laws of this country, I would spit in your face. I hope your life turns out as sad and empty as this room. Elias was never one to hold back his thoughts or words. They hurt me then, but they hurt even more now, as my home has been nothing but sad and empty since my beloved half left me just a week ago. Following the incident, Tom was transferred once more, this time by his own request. I inquired as to the rationale behind his decision, assuming that we were developing a collaborative relationship. He candidly disclosed that he was moving on from me, that he had derived enjoyment from the experience, and that it was time to move on. Additionally, he counseled me to terminate my marriage with Tom before it was too late. However, this advice was misguided, as the opportunity for reconciliation had already lapsed. A week ago, my new superior was notably strict. I was promptly admonished for my shortcomings, largely due to my instability at the time and the fact that I was not romantically involved with him. I was dismissed from my position of employment relatively quickly. My parents subsequently disowned me, following the revelation by Elias of the circumstances surrounding my dismissal. They were devoutly religious, holding prominent roles in the church I attended during my upbringing. They were unwilling to accept my actions, which they deemed immoral, and my subsequent decision to end my marriage in order to pursue a romantic relationship with another man. In terms of closure, I did not receive any form of resolution. I maintained communication with Tom in the hope that he would reach out to me within the 5 years he mentioned. The period of time that elapsed without any communication from him was significant. There was no indication that he would return to the country when I attempted to contact Elias. I discovered that he had relocated to South Africa a year later. As a result of these developments, I began to lose the majority of my friends. It became evident that they had merely tolerated me. I realized that the only positive aspect of my life was being one half of the former couple. I came to understand that I was not a source of humor and that I was not even pleasant to be around. I came to understand that I could be an extremely difficult person to be with. The realizations I had upon Elias's departure led me to a nadir of sorts, a point lower than I had previously been. I did not simply return to the same place I had been before, I sank even lower into a negative place. As of 2023, at the age of 36, nearly a decade later, I have never had a relationship that lasted beyond the initial 3 months. I am deeply unhappy. At times, I find myself contemplating a peaceful passing in my sleep. On occasion, I find myself blaming Daniel for his abrupt departure. I hope that any woman contemplating opening up her marriage reads this and avoids making the same mistake. I still cling to the hope that one day I will be reunited with Daniel. I hope to have the opportunity to meet with Daniel and express my regret for the pain I have caused him. Despite the passage of time, I wish to convey that I have not moved on from our relationship and that I still hold a deep affection for him. I hope to convey the depth of my regret for the pain I have caused him and how I had wanted to build a new life with him. My dating life has also suffered greatly as a result of my actions. I have been in several relationships, but whenever the story comes up, I can see the love drain from the faces of these men. I hope to have the opportunity to rebuild a relationship with Daniel and to demonstrate my commitment to moving forward. The residence purchased by Daniel and myself is a modest bungalow, commensurate with our expectations of a small family. I am in urgent need of resolution, yet I have been unable to engage in psychotherapy due to my inability to maintain employment since I was dismissed from my position by my successor 10 years ago. I have been experiencing financial difficulties. I extend my gratitude for your attention in reading this rather comprehensive account update. This update encompasses developments since I published this account 2 months ago. For those who did not view my previous post, this is an update on the circumstances surrounding my former husband. My husband, depending on one's perspective, left me when I decided to open up our marriage. It has been over 9 years since his departure, and during this period, I have come to realize how I have become virtually nothing without him. I lost everyone close to me, mostly because they adored him and only tolerated me out of necessity. However, for the first time since his departure, circumstances have begun to improve. Initially, I believe he saw my previous post because not long after I posted it, he contacted me by telephone. Hearing his voice after such a long time brought me joy. I missed the deep raspy baritone of his voice that always sent shivers down my spine during our lengthy conversations. I was unable to contain my emotions. However, I was moved to tears as I listened to how much I had heard him. He confessed that he never believed I would go through with it and initially thought it was one of my late April Fool's pranks. He revealed that a part of him died when he saw and spoke with Tom. He felt like a fool and blamed himself for staying until I broke him. He explained why he chose not to return. After an initial period of 5 years, he finally returned. By the end of the program, he had begun to experience a sense of happiness once more. He admitted that he had not wanted to see me because being in the same room as me would have jeopardized his newly found happiness. In return, I shared the story of how my life had unfolded over the course of what felt like a 2-hour conversation. During the course of a lengthy telephone conversation, tears streamed down my face as we engaged in reminiscence about the positive aspects of our relationship. I experienced a sense of regret at having allowed this individual to slip away from me at the conclusion of our interaction. He informed me that he would be arriving in the United States within a week and expressed his intention to visit me at my residence. As he had promised, he arrived at my house within the specified time frame. He arrived at my residence a week later, not with the intention of rekindling our relationship, but rather to deliver the divorce papers. He observed the profound distress that had taken hold of my life within the house. He noted the presence of the cup with the letter and his ring at the bottom. He also observed that the rooms he had previously entered remained unoccupied. Almost a decade later, for the first time in my acquaintance with him, I finally managed to discern his emotion, pity. I saw pity in his eyes as he inquired about my life, and I shared more details with him that I hadn't already conveyed over the phone. He inquired about Tom, referring to him as I proceeded to recount the sequence of events, delineating how Tom had entered the picture, spent approximately 2 months with me, and then departed. He expressed disapproval through a gesture that I surmised might have been picked up during his time in Africa. He then shook his head and made a remark that I interpreted as indicating that I had lost a 7-year relationship for just 2 months of ZX. The relationship lasted a year, with 2 months of ZX. In terms of sexual experience, I found Daniel to be the most adept. He was able to understand my desires and provide satisfaction. Unlike other men I had been with, he was not merely interested in brief encounters. I was interested in quick encounters, but I was saddened to admit that I had sacrificed everything that defined me for something Daniel excelled at even more than the other 14 men I had been with over time. Offered to cover the cost of therapy for me, and he mentioned that he had moved on. In that moment, he made me feel as though I was the center of the universe once more. He then departed. I have since finalized the divorce and have been in therapy for 1 month. I am grateful for Daniel, the wonderful man that God brought into my life. I still harbor regret for the way I acted. Nevertheless, it is time to focus on becoming a more improved individual, even if it took me 36 years to recognize this. I would like to express my sincerest gratitude once more to all of you for reading this. I hope that no further circumstances arise that would compel me to return here, and I aspire to finally move forward in life.